Welcome to the NeuroDiaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, writer, speaker, and mental health advocate. This podcast is a safe space where we can amplify our voices together. My mission is to make the world a safer and happier place for neurodivergent children and those struggling with mental health conditions and mental illness. The NeuroDiaries podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. This episode was recorded on Narrego country. This podcast openly discusses mental health issues and may contain content that is distressing for some. Please take care in deciding if this content is right for you today. Breaking stigma through stories. Welcome to the NeuroDiaries podcast. Hello and welcome back to the NeuroDiaries. I'm your host, Jade Rose, and today I've got Reanna Place here with me so Rihanna's on Instagram as Autistic Alchemist, and she shares her interests in spirituality, spiritual concepts, spiritual practices, and how they relate to healing and sort of changing your emotions, and also sharing her journey and her experience as an autistic person and how that relates to spirituality as well. So welcome, Rihanna. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I am doing well.
Good. I'm so glad to have you here. I've been following your page for a while, and I really enjoy the content you put out. It's done in such a sweet way. Like, it's a delight to watch, your thoughts, and also they're very deep thoughts as well. So I love they're very thought provoking and sort of provide different ways of thinking about things and different insights. So you are someone that I was just like, I just want to have a conversation with this person, whether it's on the podcast or not. So I'm going to invite you on just so I can chat to you.
Oh, I so appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we do get into some of those topics, I was hoping you could just introduce yourself for us and just give us an idea of what your life is, what Rihanna does on the day-to-day.
Yeah, so I'm 25. I live with my long-term partner of almost 6 years with our fur babies, my two cats, Humphrey and Puma. And besides that, I'm a really creative person at heart. I've been an artist, a painter since I was young. So there's like some of my
there's yours behind you.
And
Beautiful.
I really love being in nature too. So like hiking and camping are some of my favorite activities. And I'm also very much into like witchcraft, magic, and the occult.
Cool. Very cool. I love it. Well, keen to hear more about that. I did just want to ask you as well, so with your neurodivergence, did you want to explain what you have and how that shows up for you, or what you are, sorry?
Yeah. So I'm autistic and I'm an ADHDer as well. Both of those were late diagnosed for me, so I found out, realized, and got diagnosed for both of those later on in life. And I would say definitely being autistic, I feel like the primary thing that I feel like affects my day to day. I feel like in general, how I feel like it presents for me is I'm generally able to like do most things. It's just having the energy to sustain doing all of the things simultaneously can be hard for me. So it kind of manifests for me being not really able to work like a typical 9 to 5 job. And that's kind of why I started to pursue creating content and kind of just doing my own thing, because it just really meshed well with how I kind of vibe and work, I guess. And yeah, I would say mostly, yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. And I guess, do you feel like that might be in part because of, just the autistic experience and how much information that you're processing? Do you feel like that makes it hard for you to juggle multiple things and, a lot of stuff going on all at once all the time?
Yeah, definitely, definitely just a lot going on at the same time. What makes it interesting is that I'm not like firsthand conscious of how much I am processing, and so it often leads me to just having like figured out my energy levels and bandwidth through trial and error, because it does take me a while for me to, I think, have that conscious ping of like, oh, I'm overwhelmed, but
Yeah.
definitely I just think everything, yeah, everything is a lot, and I think it definitely contributes to, yeah, just me not being able to work that typical structure.
Yeah. Well, that's cool you've identified it, and early on in your life as well, and you can make those adaptations that is going to put you in an environment and a setting and a career path that can work for you.
Yeah, I'm so grateful, honestly, that because I am relatively like later diagnosed in life.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed autistic at 22. But the thing is, it is actually unfortunately early for a lot of people, a lot
Yeah.
of AFAB people, a lot of people of color who just get missed and fall through the cracks. And so, like, I feel like in my experience, because I'm only 25, right? Like, it's been so much of my life where I didn't know I was autistic, but now it's like I get to have the rest of my life having this knowledge and having this awareness. And it's just still so mind-blowing to me to know that, like, some people don't realize until they're in their 50s, 60s. Like, I know my father, he was definitely autistic and just never knew and was
Yeah.
never diagnosed. And so it's just, yeah, it's wild. But I'm grateful for
Yeah.
the knowledge.
Yeah, that is a good point. Most of the people that I've spoken to so far have been diagnosed sort of in their 30s, late 30s, 40s, which are called late diagnosed. So when I talk to you, I'm like, oh, you found out really early, but actually you're still late diagnosed yourself as well. It's not like you've, had the capability of going through school and uni and everything with this understanding and being able to make those accommodations through, that those huge and those formative experiences. That still has come later for you in life. How did you come to the point of getting your diagnosis?
So first, I actually realized I probably had ADHD around 18, and that was when I went to college. Because I was like, I did pretty well in school and grade school, and then I think when I went to college is when everything changed for me and where I started realizing that I just didn't operate and learn like the people around me. And so after I got my ADHD diagnosis and I tried out some ADHD medications and things, it was helping, but I just felt like there was something missing. Like,
Yeah.
even before this, there was just something about my life that had felt like a big question mark. Like, there's something going on, but I don't know how to describe or name what that mysterious something is. And then I just, out of the blue, I don't know, by workings of the universe, I got recommended a YouTube video. It was like, I think it was a TED Talk, I believe, and this woman was describing her experience being late diagnosed autistic, and something just struck me about it. Something in my gut was like, I need to watch this. And so I watched it, and I was just like, I couldn't believe how many things I just resonated with that I just didn't know how to put words to. And so I then went down this whole research bunny hole and was like, okay, this has to be what's going on. And then from there I it was mission get evaluated, and I was super lucky to be able to get evaluated because it isn't that accessible. It isn't accessible for many people. But I actually ended up going through one evaluation first and getting denied before eventually getting reassessed and then getting my diagnosis. So it was a bit of like me fighting for it for sure.
Yeah.
But I got it.
Yeah. And I've heard that's a challenge for, particularly for women who want to pursue an official diagnosis, that because autism in females is so under researched and a lot of the assessments are based around the male autistic experience, And unless the practitioner is quite specifically trained in autism in females or in like an internal presentation of autism, a lot of people are like frustratingly finding this experience that they go, they self-identify, they go through all this process, and then they get a disappointing, outcome that doesn't feel true for them, and they have to keep going with it as well. So that is really lucky that you got it in the end. But how did that experience play out for you in having to go through it again?
It was very frustrating, and it was very invalidating at first because it was already obvious to me that, like you mentioned, like I did have that internal presentation. I was very heavily masked, and that's the reason why it had gotten to this point where nobody had any clue. And so, knowing that going into my first evaluation, and then my diagnosis be denied because of reasons that were specific to masking, just like it just blew my mind. Like I remember yeah, the reasons that I were told that I did not get diagnosed was because I had made eye contact with the evaluators during the assessment, and that even though I was a little slow on picking up social cues, I still generally like came around if you gave me some time, and the signs weren't obvious enough in childhood. But the issue with that, with my experience and with many others, is that, when speaking to parents, if you're speaking to parents who that they themselves have undiagnosed or unrealized neurodivergence, or might have been kind of like, emotionally neglectful, not really notice what's going on, or, even just notice the signs, right? But then within themselves, been like, oh no, not my kid. Of
Yeah.
course, when you talk to that parent, they're not going to tell you this experience of remembering all of the ways their child was autistic, because that's not where their head was at when they were raising us. And so just for me to ask those questions and, double check to make sure that they took masking into the process, and for them to invalidate me further and also misdiagnose me with other things, with a unspecified personality disorder and some, I was like, this is not it. Like this.
Yeah.
I was like, I know I heard about this, but like, really? But I was so thankful that my second evaluation, my doctor was lovely, and she was so validating, and it was just nice to have that experience of being heard and being like, oh, I'm not crazy. This is actually what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did that and that you talk about that experience as well. I think there's a need, and we sort of have to create a demand for more assessors to be like better trained, and trained in the different presentations, and particularly for women and late diagnosed women, and the effect of masking and how that can be missed. There's definitely a need for that to be considered in the assessment. So I thank you for putting that out into the universe as well. And I wanted to ask you, so in the 3 years since you've been able to get that diagnosis, how has life changed for you in being able to maybe just have self-compassion or make accommodations for yourself? Have you noticed a big difference in, just your personal life or your quality of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have noticed a drastic difference in the quality of my life. I think my realization diagnosis was probably one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I just felt like it allowed me to view myself in a way with more understanding and more compassion than I was really able to have. I think before, there was so much about my experience, so much confusion and so many feelings I was having, that I didn't know how to describe to somebody else, but by having the knowledge that I'm autistic and being able to learn from a community of other autistic people sharing their own experiences, it just gave me like, oh, that's how you say that's what's going on, and like, oh, that's how I feel, and that's why this is like this for me. And instead of just having this day-to-day struggle and frustration with myself because I wasn't sure like why I didn't have the energy for certain things, why things were exhausting, why was I weird in that one conversation? Like, why did that person react to me that way? I just had this knowledge of like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. It is just the way I perceive things and the way I communicate is different. And with that in mind, like, I can restructure my life and have like more self-awareness to know that like it doesn't have to just be a confusing uphill battle every second. Like I actually have some intel here as to how things can get better and how I can accommodate for myself.
That's great. That's yeah, that's very heartwarming to know that that's been able to improve your life, and I hope other people, I think diagnoses are life changing and life saving in many cases as well, just giving you that peace of mind and that empowerment to know like, oh, that's what's going on for me. That's why I'm that way. It's so relieving in many cases, and then yeah, empowers you to make the changes that you need. Have you, since you found out and you've been able to use those labels and talk about this experience, have you had much experience with stigma? Have you had any sort of negativity come back on you from that?
Yeah, I've definitely had experience with stigma. I think it was interesting for me to kind of process the idea of stigma in relation to this because I had it's the one part of realizing I've always experienced stigma, but I just wasn't sure how to name it or what it was for exactly. It's like there's always something other people picked up that I could tell caused a certain reaction or caused a certain, you know, like thinking of me differently. And then there was, you know, coming to terms with the label and the diagnosis and, first being open about it with friends and family and then eventually creating content. There's definitely been a lot of stigma, and I think the most common and the most expected stigma of just the you don't look autistic.
Mm.
It's that other people not being able to grasp that their perception of you doesn't equal your firsthand inner experience. And
Yeah.
so there's just been a lot of, yeah, definitely a lot of just not seeing me as somebody who is autistic, who is disabled, somebody who struggles because I don't fit the image of whatever that person has in their mind.
Yeah, I can see how that will come into play. And it's, particularly as a female and a late diagnosed woman, because you would have lived a life, with having masking a lot of these struggles and learning how to interact in a neurotypical way because that was what has been externally expected of you. So has that made it harder as well for people to understand that, like, oh, you're not always the things that you're presenting to be? That's actually you putting a lot of effort into acting that way. And, if you don't do that, then this is actually the way you show up in the world, probably does like look a little bit more of what they expect autism to look like. But I guess, making that change for some people as you learn to unmask would be, yeah, I guess just something that they need to get their heads around. But I think people aren't realizing that that even exists. So it's it's very unconscious for them. So it's something they still need to really, work on understanding.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Like, as you mentioned, specifically for people who have been in your life while you were very heavily masked, and then post the realization and post, changing the way you do things and, maybe acting differently, expressing different needs, it can be a lot for that person to wrap their head around because it's like their whole concept of who you are as a person to them is now completely changed, even though, for us, we know firsthand it's like we're more ourselves. But particularly, I
Mm.
experienced this mostly with like family, mostly with my mom. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for how much she has grown and how much she's learning in this way. But there's definitely the aspect of like, I was just very heavily masked growing up, and a lot of the things, a lot of my work ethic and my performance and things like that, how that has taken a 180 because I need to manage my energy levels differently. It can just be very confusing. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes people's first, thought process might be, oh, are you changing what you're doing now that you're autistic? Like, are you being more autistic just because you've gotten this label and you think you need to be more autistic? And yeah, it's just a process. But it's definitely just I'm grateful for how much in general like people in my life are willing to open their minds and learn more in that regard. Because yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
not been as understanding as they are today. But
Yeah, I can imagine. I've heard people say yeah, you just sort of mentioned it that oh, I've noticed like since you've got this diagnosis, you're acting more autistic, like, or even like, oh, you're not autistic, you just think you are, and now you're acting that way. And it's like the thing to realize is once you have these realizations and you resonate with someone else presenting their autistic experience, and it's like, that's how I think, that's how I function. It's not so much like, oh, now you're acting more autistic. It's like now you're putting less energy into masking your autistic behaviors. So now you're just presenting more as you naturally would without, without covering up those behaviors. And you're, allowing yourself to make the adjustments that you need so that you can function without the stress of trying to, fit yourself into that neurotypical box. So I guess like it presents differently to friends and loved ones who have known you for a long period of time, but it's less the case of like you actively acting in an autistic way, but just allowing yourself to not act in a non-autistic way.
yeah, definitely. It's exactly what you said of like so much energy just goes into masking and keeping up that persona of fitting in and not trying to, cause any flags to go off for people that you're not normal or just like another person. And a lot of people, I think it's hard to wrap their head around that. Someone's internal experience is just a whole nother thing besides how they act on the outside
Yeah.
or, what they how they perceive somebody to be doing versus like how somebody's actually doing.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really good point. Is there anything that you would want people to understand about the autistic experience? Like if there was one fundamental thing, what would that be?
So many things. I'm like thinking of like which one do I choose? I think the fundamental thing for me that feels the most important is that there is no autism. Like I always like to think about like what is autism, like where I very much view it as just some like a way of being. Like this is
Mm.
how I interface with the world and how I interpret information and how I operate. That it isn't something external, like it isn't an external like illness or condition or something, like a lot of society and psychology, I think, makes it out to be. I think when we kind of pathologize things in that way and talk about neurotypes in that way, it can be very easy to dehumanize and separate these like critical aspects of ourselves from who we are. And I think it just makes it easier to be like, oh, there's something wrong with you because you have something that I don't. When in reality, neurotypes are something that everybody has. Like, everybody has a different neurotype, and even people who aren't autistic and who are considered neurotypical, they all vary from each other, and it's so nuanced. And so I think the most important thing is just recognizing that it is a type of person, it is a type of like brain, but it is not a separate thing that just
Mm.
some people have acquired.
I like that. This is why I love your page as well. You come out with these thoughts and these ideas that are very refreshing and just really inspiring as well to get people to philosophize and just think about things a little bit differently. And some people might really resonate with what you've just said. And I think that's, a really beautiful thought as well and really helpful to some people. And just, it's a nice way to just to remember that we're all just humans having a human experience in the world. And that looks
Right.
differently for everyone.
Right. And I think I love to think about it in the way of like, what would society and what would structures be like if we were to embrace that concept more and just recognize that, this concept of there's a right way to be, like neuronormativity, right? That there is a normal person. I feel like if we recognize that that just doesn't exist and all of this is just a construct and
Mm.
everybody operates differently in their own way, then we can really structure things in a way, because I feel like making making society accommodating for autistic people, for neurodivergent people, helps everybody, because I don't think this generalized structure of things as just supposed to be for this normal person
Yeah.
really helps anybody specifically. I imagine like if we just, yeah, we recognize that more, that neurodiversity is a normal part of the human experience, and how can we structure, just the way we learn, the way we, make income, live, to accommodate for that and to accommodate for those differences, instead of just forcing everybody down this one path that doesn't really work for most people in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I think even the neurotypical community or people that have never experienced mental illness or don't have any mental health conditions, like there's still so many accommodations and adjustments and changes to society or culture that could be made that would also impact them for the better. So it's like really there's a lot to be learned from the neurodivergent community in some of these lessons that could improve everything as a whole, really.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think part of what I am like so grateful to have experienced in a way, because I feel like autistic burnout really opened my eyes to this in a new way, that I think somebody without having this intense of an experience that causes you to really just be present with it and kind of question everything you knew about your life. Like, that experience for me
Yeah.
has allowed me to, I think, look at the way society is set up for everybody in just a new way, where I think in recognizing that the way we attach our self-worth to this idea of how well can we be this normal person that society is telling us is the way we're
Mm.
supposed to be. I feel like I lost my train of thought. But yeah, I feel like my autistic burnout it just allowed me to have this new perspective because it like forced me to look outside of that and detach from that in a
Yeah.
unique way that I don't know I would have experienced otherwise.
Yeah. I remember seeing this on your page a while ago as well, and it stood out to me because I really resonated with it as well, because you're quite spiritual with your content as well. So when you talk about autistic burnout, you were talking about this spiritual concept of ego death at the same time. And with a lot of your content, I really admire how, you're quite open about the healing journey that you've been on as well, and a lot of inner work that you've done. And when you look at healing, like I think in this sort of like mental health neurodivergence context, like you've got your sort of psychotherapy path where, you might see a psychologist, and, there's CBT and different therapies that you can do in sort of that respect. But then the spiritual path also has a lot of healing in it as well, which, at times we're looking at very similar, modes of healing, that just the language around it is very different. So when when you talk about your healing journey, I was interested to see how that has helped your sort of understanding of autism and your autistic experience in relating things like autistic burnout and ego death. What was it about that experience that helped you to sort of break down your thoughts and understanding of yourself, and how did that make your journey easier for you?
Found that a lot of my identity, like prior to this point, was very much focused around, performance, achievement. And I feel as a lot of us are in the way that society very much, encourages, just a certain way of life that, you want to go to college, get a good job, and do all of the things. And so, as somebody who did well in school initially up until college, I think there was a lot of expectation, being successful and performing in a certain type of way. And so I started to also just connect my sense of self-worth with how well I could do those things. And so I very much, wanted to be that person that had that career and was, independent. I could support myself. I didn't need support from other people. When I hit burnout and in the realization of all of these things that I am working so hard for because I feel as though I need to achieve these things or I need to get to this point in my life in order to be worthy, I was not able to keep those things up. I realized all those things were actually burning me out and draining me and getting me to that point of hitting that wall and barely being able to get out of bed in the morning. And just to have that experience of everything that I thought I was, like every aspect of myself that was based around performance and being independent, all had to crumble because now strive towards a certain sort of career that I thought I needed to. Now I couldn't finish college, graduate like I thought I needed to. And now, I can't just always just like go do things and go out the door by myself when I want to because sometimes it's, too overwhelming for me now. And that was just a complete shattering of like everything I had been basing my life around of this is the way my life needs to go. And initially, like as any form of ego death is, there are different types of ego death. There's like the psychedelic ego death where like you have that experience and it's very spiritual. And then I think there's other forms of ego death. Like you might have an autistic burnout where you just, all sense of your identity, you realize is not yourself anymore. And it was incredibly terrifying and brought up so much within myself that I think was so necessary for me to acknowledge. Um, but after that crumbling and just, well, what now? It just makes room for possibility. And I feel like it's opened my perception of myself beyond like who am I telling myself I need to be, to actually learn who it is I am and be able to ask myself the questions of like, who do I want to be? Like, what do I want my life to look like outside of everything I've been told it needs to be? And so it's just been freedom, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much freedom.
It sounds really freeing. Yeah. It's like, no doubt, very confronting and like confusing to go through. But your journey coming out the other side sounds very freeing. It's almost like that image of the phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the spirituality side of stuff. So, a lot of the things that you talk about um, sort of present this interconnectivity between spiritual beliefs, spiritual experience and autism, with this idea of both of them being experiences or perspectives that sort of put you on the outskirts of society a little bit, give this innate separation between the normative experience and how you think, how you perceive, how you interact with the world. Do you think there's that sort of makes any predisposition between, autistics and the spiritual experience?
Yeah, I definitely believe that there's a huge connection there. And I think I've definitely thought about there's different aspects that I feel like are at play here with why it is so interconnected. Because there is the aspect of autistic people having a different experience where a lot of us are kind of, most of us feel very alienated and just kind of like for myself at least, I have felt like I've been on the outside looking in to society. Like I feel like I am within society and other people, and especially being in school growing up, but I don't always feel a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think having that experience of not feeling a part of it and also having the experience of there not being much guidance when you're neurodivergent or autistic growing up of like this is how you approach life in your unique way. I think it just causes this natural, almost unique relationship with yourself that is almost like a great environment as almost like you're planting a seed. It's like the perfect environment for that seed of spirituality to grow because spirituality I feel like is just acknowledging that like source, God, the divine, the universe is within ourselves and flows through all of us and that energy like our souls are separate from the experience we have in the physical and all of those forms of, who we feel as though we need to be, like the roles we need to play. And so I feel like having that experience of just not having that much guidance and kind of feeling like you're separate from other people has, at least in my experience, caused me to be very internal and go within a lot more, which I feel like has led to me seeking a lot of guidance and answers in, spiritual concepts. And then there's also another part where I feel as though we can tend to be more sensitive to energy and more perceptive to those experiences because I feel as though how I like to like conceptualize it is like autistic people taking in energy is like if you were almost drinking in energy, like through a huge straw, right? It's just everything is coming in, like all of the stimuli, all of the energy, and you don't really filter it as much. And maybe other people have more of like a filter where they're not processing as much as quickly. And so I think there's that level to it where we can just be more sensitive to energy, feel more naturally connected to the spiritual side of things in that way.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think you're right, because it's just, yeah, you with sensory processing, emotional processing, like how much extra information neurodivergent people are, taking in from their surroundings. I think it's definitely, feasible to say that they are, able to sense a deeper world and, a deeper sensitivity to energy around them. Something just occurred for me when you were speaking. I was thinking, like, because the experience of being neurodivergent, a lot of people do resonate with this feeling of alienation growing up and feeling very isolated, feeling very separate to the world. With mental health and mental illness, like, people have this feeling as well. I think something that spirituality can offer is when you start to experiment or go down the spiritual path, or find some connection there. And this could be religion as well. I'm not really particularly religious, so I don't know, but just giving that, it gives you that sense of like connection to something deeper, and this sense of connection to other humans, where when you grow up neurodivergent and you feel innately disconnected or innately different to other people, finding this spiritual connection and this, ability to feel connected to the world on that deeper level is, I think, that can be very healing and like very positive for people to have. Do you think that could be like a part of it, or in your experience, has that been something that sort of helped you, find that connection and find that, I guess, more positive way of experiencing life?
Yeah, 100%. And I love the way you said that and that you brought this up in that way, because I definitely feel like that's a huge part of it. I think learning how interconnected we all are as a collective, amongst people and also just amongst the earth and plants and everything, has provided this sense of comfort of knowing, even though I often feel alone and very just solo mission on my journey of figuring things out, that I can't possibly be isolated truly, or I can't possibly be having this 100% unique experience when at our core we are all so connected. And I know, just for me personally, that has provided me so much healing and comfort when oftentimes I can struggle to feel that personal connection with other people. And yeah, I can imagine, like, for lots of others, I'm sure that it has been very healing for them in that way as well.
Yeah, I think so. It's sort of like, if you feel like you struggle to connect on a sort of surface and, interpersonal level and read the social cues, and, you just feel different to everyone, it's comfort. You said the word comfort, and it's like, it is very comforting to know that actually on this very deeper level, that connection is there, and it's even more like profound in some ways, because it's really like you feel it in a very deep sort of core of your being sort of way. So it is, I think it's a very comforting thought. If someone wanted to start to learn more about spirituality and connection in this sense, do you have any ideas on how they might sort of start to tiptoe down that path, or start to increase that awareness or that sense of connection?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think how I like to view it is, if someone is finding themselves at a place of wanting to go more down the spiritual path and explore those things, then likely they already are. And I think knowing that and just having the intention of connecting more spiritually opens so many doors and allows things to kind of pop up for you and allows you to be led in certain areas that are important for you and how like someone might uniquely connect with their own spiritual path, because I think it's very different and very unique for everybody, and how somebody kind of unravels and discovers that within themselves is going to be very like personal to them. And I know for me, kind of around when my journey started, I really had no clue like what exactly I should be doing, but I knew that I felt a pull there. And I remember setting that intention within myself of just being like, universe, I want to learn more. I want to connect more with spirituality. And things just things just unraveled. Things just fell into place like how they were meant to for my specific journey. And I feel like, yeah, I feel like that's generally how it will go for others as well.
I think you're right. Yeah, I resonate with that. I think I would have forgotten that, so I wouldn't have thought to say that. But now reflecting on it, I'm like, yeah, intention. So I think that's a really good starting point. Intention to notice things that come up, intention to learn more, intention to, yeah, just allow messages to come up for you. And I think you're right. Like, it's such an individualistic thing that no two people's experience is going to be the same. So sort of just being open, being curious about what's here to come forwards for you and what you can learn from that and how it can help you.
Yeah, definitely. Like I would say, because there's so many different aspects of it, right? There's very simple and very like yeah, there's very like simple, I think, is like a simple avenue, and then there's a very like deep and complex avenue, and wherever someone falls on those paths is very dependent on just what they find interesting and
Yeah.
and where they feel pulled. And so I think it's just so it's like a fun exploration to see
Yeah.
just where you journey down and like what things you learn along the way with just being open to the possibility of it.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong way to go about it, and no two people's experience will be the same. I think I'm quite like I'm quite like seasonally spiritual, in the sense that at certain periods of my life where I've maybe felt a little bit lost, or maybe have been searching for like the deeper meaning or the next steps, or struggling to find my purpose, have been periods where I've gone a lot deeper spiritually to try and, I guess, figure those things out, have a deeper internal experience and connect with like, who am I? What do I really want to do? Follow the, the signs of like, okay, what are the right steps to take? Like looking for those signs, in the universe and following that. And then when I feel like I've got my mission and my next steps, I'm more sort of more present in the material world, and I'm more like, okay, like go, and I'm, putting less emphasis on connecting and on spiritual practices. So it sort of, for me, it sort of comes in waves, and it's like this deep tool that I can use when I need it. But on my day to day, I'm probably more sort of like surface level and like just checking in, like, okay, am I still going in the right direction? Like, yeah, okay.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's like I'm really happy that you said that, because I think that's so important to acknowledge that being someone who is spiritually connected does not always mean that every single day feels like this deep spiritual journey, and it does very much come in waves. Like you mentioned, like I notice the same thing for myself, even though, I consider myself a very spiritual person. But there are a lot of times where I just go through phases of where I'm not really doing, quote unquote spiritual things. And I think it can be, even sometimes within myself, I have been like, oh, am I just slacking off? Like, should I be
Mm.
doing these spiritual practices? I haven't meditated for months. Like, what does this mean? And I think there can be a lot of I think just like maybe felt pressure sometimes of like if we
Yeah.
consider ourselves to be spiritual, right, it needs to always be this deep transformative thing that we're going through. But the reality is, like you said, it's like it comes in waves, and I think it's important that we allow ourselves to have that space from it. Because at the end of the day, we are humans. Like, we are here having the physical experience. We are meant to be having this experience and learning from this experience. And
Mm.
while it's, great to connect spiritually and have that avenue for guidance, it can also be easy to get lost in it and forget that, oh, it's totally okay just to live and just to, wake up and not like meditate, or sometimes not like, do a tarot reading or do this whole thing. Like, we can exist too, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay too. Yeah. Like I think there's some people that, end up working in that field and maybe feel like it's right for them to be heavy in this, deep in this, like every day. But then for my experience personally, I'm like, okay, well, that's not my calling, so to speak. Like, go deep in it, but then like bring out what you need to and then connect, on a more sort
Right.
of normal, quote unquote, normal plane, and just bring that back in, use it as it needs to be used, experience it when it's calling, and then, yeah, feel okay about not being deep in that all the time. Because I think, as you said, it's sort of like you feel this pressure to like, oh, like last month I was really like spiritually connected and doing my practices every day, and now I like don't feel as drawn to do that. But then I'm also like, but I'm doing fine at the moment, and like I'm feeling really purposeful and I'm feeling really productive, and or even not, like maybe this is a period of deep rest and I just need to like have some material, material experiences and experience that for a while, because we are, humans living in a human world, and this is the deeper connection is just one side of the experience.
Yeah, I definitely. And I think that is something I tend to struggle with just myself, with just bringing myself back down to earth, because I can get very, I just love it. Like, it's like my special interest. Like, I deep dive in it. Grounding has definitely been just a recurring theme of like, all right, it is important to like be a person, to in tune with my physical body and just exist. Because it is, yeah, like you said, it's very easy just to get wrapped up in it.
Well, I guess last thing I'm just really curious to know is sort of your experience with other people and accommodations or support that you need. I think there's so many misconceptions or just a lack of knowledge about what people can do to support neurodivergent people. For you personally, and the way you experience it in the world, what is it that you need from other people? Like, what do you want them to understand when they interact with you, or how can they best support you?
I think the main thing I always appreciate is just openness, and someone who is trying to figure a good way to word this. I think I've always benefited from just general like openness and flexibility. It's hard to pinpoint for me like what a specific support would look like from somebody, or from, if I were to be in a job or school or something, because I feel like it very much changes for me depending on the circumstance and what it is I need at the time. And I think just the willingness to even open that door of asking, what do you need, or how would you prefer this to go? I guess I'm thinking more so in like like work environments or things like that where I don't know. This is
Yeah, but I think that's part of it as well. Like, you don't always know. You're not always going to know what you need in any
right.
given situation. So maybe just like that base level understanding that you might have different needs as you go throughout the day, and you enter a cafe, or you go to a movie, or you ride the bus, or but just recognizing that like your experience of that might feel different. It might bring up more discomforts for you. It might bring up overwhelm for you, and sort of, yeah, being open to what those needs might be and how they might fluctuate throughout the day. Do you
Yeah,
think something like
definitely.
that?
Yeah, definitely. And something I've experienced is just the interesting just how interesting it was that I actually was more supported with people and with environments that weren't particularly set up to be accommodating or set up with neurodivergence in mind, but the people that were there were just generally open-minded. Whereas in a system and in like when I was in school, there was like an autism center at the school, and it was not accommodating at all. And it was just very like, this doesn't make any sense. And so it's just interesting to know that something being saying that, like when something is specifically says they're set up for autism or neurodivergent, it's not always like a prerequisite for them actually being accommodating. And sometimes, like, people who don't have knowledge or don't have education about autism are way more accommodating. And so I don't know how much it really is about education and about knowledge and understanding, more so than it can be about like just open-mindedness and like compassion from other people, to know that other people are different and they don't always have to understand all of that difference to support and like give that person what they need and what can help.
I like that, because those are innate shifts that someone can make on a personal, like individual level quite quickly. It doesn't need to be a huge like societal infrastructural change. It's just be open minded,
Yeah, and I think
be
ask more
kind.
questions too. Yeah, just like just ask more questions. I think it's the not assuming, especially with neurodivergent people. It's just often the way we operate, and even when we say certain things, when we intend certain things, it's like if you're not sure, if something is obvious to you of like, oh, of course, I don't think this person would need help with this, I just feel like ask, I feel like asking people more questions and having asking questions not, being interpreted as like a rude, rude
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I think would just be so, so great and just create lots of space for more support.
Yeah. It's funny because, like, neurodivergent people are quite known for asking a lot of questions, like seeking a lot of details, being perceived as rude sometimes because we're just quite blunt in, like, that's interesting. Tell me more. Tell me this information. And, but that's also like a communication preference that we've been told is not valued in the neurotypical community. But it's a great, there's a lot of the time it's like, oh, neurodivergent people have to mask and change their communication preferences to fit into the neurotypical way. Whereas this is one that I feel like really they should be coming, over this side, because this is just a great way to get all the information and, be curious, figure things out without making assumptions. So it's a difficult one for a neurotypical person to get their head around, because they're like, oh, but I can't ask that. It's rude or it's impolite. Whereas if they're asking it to a neurodivergent person, the neurodivergent person is there going, yes, ask me, be blunt, let's be open, talk about it. So yeah, I think that's really a point to hammer home to, to neurotypical people. Ask the questions. We want to be asked. We want to share this message clearly with you and have, a lot of information discussed on this topic. There's no, don't be shy. We want this communication.
Yes, definitely. It's just so funny. It's funny how it's like such a common experience with the topic of questions. And I just feel like it's so important that, we should be able to ask each other questions and feel safe giving answers. And there's just like this funny, I think, charade around it that has
Yeah.
happened with
Yeah.
just like manners and communication. It's like, why can't we just cut to the chase and ask questions? Why does it have to
Yeah.
be this whole this whole ordeal?
It's like this ego charade as well with assumptions and just like, oh, I can't ask what that's like because I need to like assume, like appear like I already know. So I like make my opinions off these tiny assumptions that I have when there's no need, like no one is expecting everyone to be experts in every single topic. So if you don't know, like that's completely fine. Just ask the questions and learn about it. And you don't need to have an underlying understanding or any assumptions about it. It's kind of better if you don't, and then we can inform them together with accurate information.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, it's interesting how I see like polarity in just communication styles and how it's just interesting how on one hand it can go so complex and almost like an art form of like how can I say what I want to say without saying it? And then just the basics of communication of just like mutual understanding. And I just think autistic people are very much are very like simple and just wanting mutual understanding. And I think it can be hard to like navigate within the context where socially things are just more of the I don't know, like the charade. I just keep thinking of charade because
Yeah,
that's what I feel
yeah.
like it is.
It feels that way. I agree. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed our chat. I've learnt a lot as well, and it's just been so nice to connect with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Me too. And for the listeners, if you want to connect more with Reanna, you can find her on Instagram under Autistic Alchemist and check out her page and her messages there. And yeah, once again, thanks so much for coming on. Enjoying the Neuro Diaries? Every interaction helps break the stigma, so be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our Instagram at the Neuro Diaries Podcast and join our Facebook group to continue the conversation. Through sharing and connection, we can foster understanding, empathy, and support for all.